So I'm supposed to be doing some other stuff right now, but I can't get motivated to do that stuff, and I'm currently flying on coffee right now. A whole big old pot of good old-fashioned coffee. So I figured I'd start ranting about stuff and see how it comes out. And I was trying to decide what to rant about, and I figured I'd do it on fighting games. My favorite fighting game, differences in 3D fighters and 2D fighters, and so I'm going to do that. For starters, favorite fighting game of all time is Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. I still love it. Super good. Super duper good. For a long time, I was never actually into fighting games. Well, that's not entirely true. There was a time in my childhood, like every child in my life, where I enjoyed Street Fighter 2 and the Mortal Kombat series, and a little bit of Virtua Fighter and Soul Blade, and those kind of things, but that was only at the arcade. I never really took them all home and took them seriously, except I did have them on the Game Gear, and those were pretty good for Game Gear standards. Nowadays, it's kind of crap. After my big, arcade phase as a child, I never really went back to the arcades, mainly because we never went bowling and I never went to the skating rink anymore because I was older and it's considered creepy to hang out with children when you're 23 years old. Whatever. I never really got back into fighting games, and I kind of lost interest in playing fighting games. And then I moved up to Indiana for a while, and my cousins got me back into fighting games, so thank you, Jason and Phil. Now I play a few fighting games. I play, like I said, Street Fighter games. I tried to get into the SNK games, but they are very hard to play. And I love the Street Fighter game. I've only beaten it once, because it's a pain in the ass. The last guy, Gil, is insanely hard, especially if he has his resurrect ability. And it's a lot harder than Street Fighter 4. I remember when I picked up Street Fighter 4, I was like, okay, here we go. And I beat it the first try. And then I amped it to the hardest setting, and I beat it again and again and again. And I was really bummed out. So I stopped playing. And then I remember going to this convention thing in like September or something, and there were these guys playing fighting games. I mean, this whole area of people playing Halo and fighting games, but they were playing mainly Street Fighter 4 and Blaze Blue, which Blaze Blue get terribly heavy off into the Guilty Gear series. Something about it was just so, it felt like a clusterfuck at the beginning, and so I couldn't really get too into Guilty Gear. And then Blaze Blue came out, and it kind of feels like the same Guilty Gear style feeling, but it's a little bit better. I kind of like Blaze Blue. At any rate, they were playing Street Fighter 4 as well, and like I said, I beat it a bunch of times, and I went through the stuff. I unlocked Akuma. I never unlocked Goken, though, or Guken, or... I hear he's not that good, and then I decided to play him for Snickers, and he's very difficult. I'm basically a noob, I guess you would say, when it comes to playing Street Fighter, because the only character I care to play is Ken Masters. So he's pretty much like the top tier of any Street Fighter game. Except I think Street Fighter 2 Ryu is a bit better in terms of fighting, because Fighter 2 all you do is spam Hadoken shots over and over until your enemy's dead, but that's a whole different game entity altogether. So at this thing, I was playing Street Fighter 4, and these guys were really good. And of course, I was out of practice after this. I was seriously out of practice, and they were going in there with their, super moves, and I couldn't compete with that. But I went in anyway, and the minute I sat down, they're like, yes, some competition. I go, no. Please don't get your hopes up, because this is going to be a short battle for you. And it went in round 3, so I wasn't as bad as I thought I was, but I completely got owned in round 3, so I suck at that game, and I'm actually not terribly good at Street Fighter 3. I'd like to say that I'm average in Street Fighter 3. I'm nowhere near as good as my cousins in fighting games, nowhere near as good, but to be fair, I've only been back to playing fighting games for 2 years. That's not even like 2 years straight. They have been playing fighter games for like 12 years, for God's sakes. They've been playing Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat and Killer Instinct over and over and over, and they will dominate. At any rate, I still love those games very much. And one of the things I like about Street Fighter 3, when comparing to like Street Fighter 4 or even Street Fighter 2, is that they have this technical system. It's called parries, or something like that, parrying, And it's kind of a step up from blocking. Basically what it is when somebody hits you, you have to press into the attack, and not only will your character take no chip damage or anything, but he recovers like instantly, giving you a time to retort with another attack. Very awesome ability. I hardly ever use it. I really need to get into using that more strategically because I don't. It really sets itself apart from Street Fighter 2, which, I mean, Street Fighter 2 was a very early stuff. They were still working out kinks, so they had a lot that they could tune up and work out. However, Street Fighter 4, they kind of that ability, and it's a lot clunkier for me. I don't like it as much as the parry system. Earlier I was going to distinguish the difference between 3D fighters and 2D fighters. If you've ever played Street Fighter 2, I mean, it's a 2D fighter. You can't really argue with it. It's 2 dimensions and that sort of thing. But when you go up to Street Fighter 4, don't be confused and think that that's a 3D fighter just because it has 3D graphics. It is not a 3D fighter. It's still a 2D fighter because you're only fighting on 2 dimensions. You can jump up and you can go forward and back. And the difference between a 2D fighter and a 3D fighter is depth. Virtua Fighter, the Tekken series, anything like that, pretty much, where it can shift into depth and dodge through depth, or dodge through depth, that didn't make sense. But basically, it's that sort of thing. If you ever play Virtua Fighter or Tekken, legitimate 3D fighters. I mean, things like Street Fighter 4, they're not 3D fighters, but that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that they're not 3D fighters, they're still 2D fighters. I personally prefer 2D fighters because 3D fighters have a different kind of fighting system. Like with the Hadoken, it's always, down, diagonal, and forward, and punch. They're standard kind of moves with a lot of 2D fighters. I mean, SNK has a lot of it. Guilty Gear series, BlazBlue now, Street Fighter. All of those 2Ds kind of follow the same pattern of attack abilities. But when you get into 3D fighters, I mean, you can't push down in those games because you just dodge and go into that depth thing. So you can't do Hadoken punches. You have to do technical things, like in Virtua Fighter series. Everything's a specific punch or a block, It's not that, I just despise that system. It's just, I'm not really good at it, and I don't prefer it. I enjoy the 2D system a lot better. However, that being said, Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution, or Evolved, I can't remember what it was called. That's like my second favorite fighting game. And mainly because it's so technical. I hear Virtua Fighter 5 gets more technical, which may or may not be a good thing, because Virtua Fighter 4 is very technical. You have to understand, like, the tutorial basically says, look, you gotta know what he's about to throw at you and block it, or else you're screwed. So understand their combos and that sort of thing. And you really can. It's super duper fun. Crappy fighting games. I guess I'll rant about that really quick. The ones that go without saying, like Clay Fighters. I never got into Clay Fighters. It was kind of during the time when, like, Mortal Kombat came out and everybody was using that digitized style. And then, like, Killer Instinct came out as well. Just wanted to latch on to that, it feels, and they didn't round it out too well, so you come out with these kind of crappy fighting games. And then as well, like Primal Rage, I played a little bit of it on the arcades. It was just kind of weird. It's fun for a little bit of just boredom killing, because, I mean, you can, like, knock your worshippers, your little cavemen people around, and everybody, their hearts, like, explode or something like that. So Primal Rage, it wasn't a very good game, but it had its moments. However, like Rise of the Robots and Shaq Fu, those 2 games right there, Shaq Fu, oh god. I downloaded an emulator of Shaq Fu and tried to play it, and it is just so painful to play. Every single second of it is just mind-numbing. And of course I chose Shaq because it's called Shaq Fu. Why do you want these made-up people? As well as Rise of the Robots. I had that for Game Gear as well. Just a fugly game. And if you've never heard of Rise of the Robots, because if you're a game fan, I'm sure you've heard of Shaq Fu at some point in time. You're like, Shaq Fu, that sounds so familiar. Shaq Fu is one of those games that's so bad, people have to know about it. But Rise of the Robots, it was just bad. The only redeeming quality for Shaq Fu was the fact that Shaq was endorsing this stupid fighting game. With Rise of the Robots, they pretty much just said, hey, let's just throw this out there. And they said, well, what about gameplay? And they said, no, don't worry about it. And they said, oh, okay. So Rise of the Robots sucked. And at any rate, I've been ranting like crazy, though, about these fighting games. And Street Fighter good, Rise of the Robots bad. Everything else in between has its moments, I suppose. Let me know if you like fighting games, I guess. Thanks for letting me rant.